Now in our 26th year, more than a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1356 with a release and air date of Saturday, February 22nd, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
On the air and on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, amateur radio news and special features, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1356 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Ham Radio Gizmo's platform launches a new documentary series to inspire amateur radio operators. Ofcom, the UK regulator, has eyes on spectrum sharing on the 6 GHz band. The Dayton HamVention announces the theme for the 2025 show. ARRR's Bootcamp will be held during the California Ham Escape at Big Bear Lake. President Trump expands White House oversight of the Federal Communications Commission. The league announces more openings for the next on-the-air live webcast. The International Amateur Radio Union prepares for its upcoming centenary. Communication support for the Michigan dog sled race has both dogs and amateurs pulling long shifts. The league announces a call for QST articles for the July 2025 special issue on emergency communications. Young amateurs will have free admission at the upcoming International DX Convention. High school and a science fiction movie spark interest in amateur radio. We will have the story in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, Phi K6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will update us on his open-source Bald Yak project in a segment called Phosphor and the Impertinence of Software. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week will piles us all into the Wayback Machine to take us back to the early 1920s as amateurs transition from Spark to CW. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside the capital of New York State, where it's actually going above freezing this weekend, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in downtown Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Reporting from our news bureau on the outskirts of Music City, USA and Lebanon, Tennessee, eagerly awaiting spring, I'm Al Shephard, WK8W.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And from our news bureau in Naugatuck, Connecticut, where we've had just about enough winter, I'm Steve Sawyer, K1FRC.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where this recent snowfall is finally melting, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our True New York News Bureau, where frankly, I'm tired of snow for the season, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting live from our news bureau in Western Mass, where we're all desperately clinging to the hope that spring will actually show up in the next 27 days. Because let's be honest, winter's been hanging around way too long. I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the temperature is prognosticated to actually get above freezing this week, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're going from the deep freeze to spring? Wow! I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, with our lead story. Ham Radio Gizmos proudly announced the launch of its groundbreaking documentary platform designed to educate and inspire the ham radio community. This innovative series melds rich historical narratives with modern technological insights, offering viewers an in-depth look at the evolution of the amateur radio hobby. Led by industry veteran Lee Love, callsign N2LEE, whose diverse background spans decades in marketing and extensive television production, as well as 15 years as a commercial advertising photographer and director in Washington, D.C. Ham Radio Gizmos is set to transform how enthusiasts engage with ham radio's history and innovation. Our documentary series is a journey through time, showcasing the untold stories of ham radio's past, while highlighting the breakthroughs that continue to shape its future, said Lee Love, founder and chief storyteller at Ham Radio Gizmos. By connecting historical insights with today's cutting-edge technology, we aim to empower both new and seasoned hams with knowledge and inspiration. Key highlights of the documentary series are historical exploration, delve into little-known narratives that reveal the origins and evolution of ham radio. Modern innovation, understanding how early breakthroughs have paved the way for today's technological advancements. Expert storytelling, benefit from Lee Love's unparalleled expertise, blending decades of industry experience with a passion for ham radio. Engaging multimedia content, experience documentaries enriched with archival footage, expert interviews, and in-depth analysis. Ham Radio Gizmos is dedicated to providing a comprehensive resource that not only educates but also celebrates the legacy and future of ham radio. Through this documentary series, the platform promises to be an indispensable guide for enthusiasts eager to explore the technical and historical dimensions of the hobby. Ham Radio Gizmos is an innovative digital platform committed to exploring the rich legacy and evolving future of ham radio. Through engaging documentaries and expert content, the platform seeks to educate, inspire, and empower the ham radio community by bridging historical milestones with modern technological advancements.
The concept of spectrum sharing is nothing new for radio amateurs, but now in the UK, the regulator is proposing that, for the first time, spectrum sharing should be done between two different technologies. With traffic increasing in the United Kingdom for the usage of both Wi-Fi and mobile services, Ofcom is exploring ways for both technologies to share the upper part of the 6 GHz band, frequencies between 6.425 and 7.125 GHz. The regulator is hoping that its implementation will benefit mobile networks, especially in crowded areas, and at the same time provide support for advanced Wi-Fi services. The proposed sharing would require both services to explore ways of integrating shared usage, perhaps by developing a sensing capability in which one could detect the other's presence on a frequency. In a statement, Ofcom said the change would provide a basis for the future, eventually supporting virtual and augmented reality as well as artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, Ofcom said that it hopes to see the lower part of the 6 GHz band, frequencies between 5.925 and 6.425, used for higher power Wi-Fi outdoors whose frequencies are at present only allocated for low power indoor use.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
In a developing story, on February 12, 2025, Rig Expert's administrative office in Kyiv, Ukraine, was destroyed by a Russian ballistic missile. All employees are reported to be safe. Rig Expert is a leading manufacturer of antenna and cable analyzers, and officials said they are committed to restoring operations as soon as possible. Our top priority is the safety of our team and the continuity of our operations, said Ashot Andreev, Chief Executive Officer. While our administrative office is in ruins, our production facility survived, allowing us to continue serving our customers and partners. The company issued a statement saying even though this is a difficult situation, the Rig Expert team is committed to restoring operations as soon as possible to continue providing our great products to you. We are working tirelessly to minimize delays and fulfill our commitments while maintaining customer support operations.
Screen Rant magazine reports of an upcoming film set to portray the late Art Bell and his radio show Coast to Coast AM. Paul Giamatti is said to be starring in the lead role. With Giamatti, a two-time Oscar-nominated actor attached to star, the Art Bell biopic has received a big boost in terms of its prestige. The late paranormal DJ hosted the 5-hour radio show Coast to Coast, which took unscreened calls from guests recounting allegedly first-hand tales of alien encounters, reincarnation, time travel, and other phenomena reminiscent of the X-Files. Bell even claimed to have had his own UFO encounter. At the peak of its popularity during the 90s, Coast to Coast drew an audience of roughly 10 million listeners nightly. Amazon and Warner Brothers are said to be bidding on the project. In addition to working as a radio host, Art Bell was an amateur radio operator holding a license in the U.S., W6OBB, since reassigned, and Philippines call for F1AB. He was originally licensed at age 13, eventually earning an extra class license in the United States.
The Dayton HamVention is May 16th through the 18th of this year. Chairman Brian Markland, N8UDQ, unveiled the convention theme, which is Radio Independence. He announced that her theme this year will be highlighting freedom, resilience, and endless possibilities within amateur radio. As our world grows more connected through POTA, SOTA, YouTube, and international communications, radio is breaking through the traditional boundaries like never before. Historically, radio has been regulated and even banned in some places, but today we have the freedom to explore, communicate, and innovate without limits. At HamVention, we're proud to champion this radio independence. Meanwhile, it's been announced that ARRL's Bootcamp will be held at California's Big Bear Ham Escape. Plan to attend the Big Bear Ham Escape on April 25 through April 27 in the Big Bear Lake community of California. The ARRL Orange Section Convention is also sponsored by the Big Bear Visit Big Bear and Amateur Radio Digital Communications, a California-based foundation with roots in amateur radio and the technology of Internet communications. An estimated 700 participants are expected to visit Big Bear Lake for the weekend. Approximately 30 seminars and workshops will be held. A full-day introductory ARRL's Bootcamp and a full day of POTA and SOTA training will also be held on Friday.
Due to significant demand, ARRL has expanded the number of available spots for this month's On the Air Live, an online training session linked to content in the current issue of On the Air magazine. The program quickly reached its original capacity. The live event will be hosted by the ARRL education specialist Wayne Green, KB4 DSF. It's a good problem to have, said ARRL Education and Learning Manager Steve Goodgame, K5ATA. We can easily add more capacity, and we're glad that ARRL members are responding so positively to the concept, he said. On the Air Live is scheduled for February 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and will be on the topic of how to use your handheld radio. Registration in advance is required, but is free for ARRL members. If you can't make the event, a recording will be available in the ARRL Learning Center.
A sweeping executive order signed by President Donald Trump this week places the FCC, along with other independent government agencies, under the increased supervision of the White House. The FCC and other agencies were previously not under direct White House control. Under the new order, all independent federal agencies and executive branches must submit draft regulations to be reviewed by the White House. The federal agencies will also have their performance standards and budget allotments reviewed by the White House. Further, the independent agencies, which also include the Federal Trade Commission and Securities and Exchange Commission, must appoint White House liaisons and regularly consult with and coordinate policies and priorities with the White House. The executive order lays out Trump's argument for the change, saying previous administrations have allowed so-called independent regulatory agencies to operate with minimal presidential supervision. These regulatory agencies currently exercise substantial executive authority without sufficient accountability to the president, and through him to the American people, the order says. Moreover, these regulatory agencies have been permitted to promulgate significant regulations without review by the president. For the federal government to be truly accountable to the American people, officials who wield vast executive power must be supervised and controlled by the people's elected president. The executive order says the Office of Management and Budget will now have supervising authority over the agencies. The OMB will also be able to adjust independent agencies' apportionments to ensure that U.S. tax dollars are spent wisely. The FCC, now under the leadership of Republican Chairman Brendan Carr, did not immediately respond to requests seeking comment on the latest development. The National Association of Broadcasters, up to this point, has mostly applauded the regulatory approach of the new FCC under Trump, including the appointment of Carr as chairman and the nomination of Olivia Trusty to fill an open seat at the commission.
Timothy Ellum, KC, VE6SH, who is the president of the International Amateur Radio Union, reminds all of us that this is the year that the International Amateur Radio Union celebrates a century of connections. When amateur radio pioneers first gathered in Paris on April 18, 1925, they created the International Amateur Radio Union to support their activities worldwide. Since then, the IARU has worked tirelessly to defend and expand the official frequency allocations for amateur radio. Thanks to the support of enlightened administrations in every part of the globe, radio amateurs can experiment and communicate in frequency bands that are strategically located throughout the radio spectrum. From 25 countries in 1925, the IARU has grown to include over 160 member societies today. In the meantime, the IARU is kicking off its centenary celebrations on April 18th, World Amateur Radio Day. Our theme for this year is A Century of Connections, celebrating 100 years of amateur radio innovation, community, and advocacy. As an advocate and representative for the amateur services, the IARU is a proud and active member of the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU. They were first admitted into the work of the Consultative Committee on International Radio, that was the forerunner to today's ITU radio communications sector, back in 1932. IARU have continued contributing to ITU's radio communications and emergency response activities ever since.
Winter racing fans in Michigan's Upper Peninsula finally got what they waited 2 years for, enough snow in the region for the return of a sled dog race that is a qualifier to the world-famous Iditarod. Hams weren't pulling sleds, but they were on the scene anyway, pulling down some big responsibilities to ensure participant safety. It's called the UP200, and its 228-mile snow-covered path through the near wilderness, creek crossings, and challenging terrain in northern Michigan brings out sled dogs, racing fans, and amateur radio operators. Significant snowfall this year also put two smaller concurrent races back in action, the Midnight Run and the Jack Pine. The races between the 13th and 17th of February challenged the four-footed athletes, the sledders' navigation skills, and some 30 radio amateurs responsible for keeping everyone as safe and as on track as they could. Radio communication was coordinated by Tom Perry, KE8, TPT, and many of the hams were from the Hiawatha Amateur Radio Association. Tom told local media outlets that the success of the system drew heavily on having a robust link repeater system in the region. This allowed everyone to hear all the other radio operators, with cell phone access not being an option. That kept everyone, including the hams, in the race. The Iditarod, a major sporting event in Alaska, will be held next month in Anchorage.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Every July, QST, the membership journal of the ARRL, publishes a special issue with an EmComm focus. This issue is a perfect opportunity for your Aries group to share your experiences doing exercises and drills, as well as participating in responses, so other groups will benefit from your experience. Here's what QST is looking for: 1,200 to 1,800 words. Tell the story of your participation in an exercise or response with the how-to angle. For example, if your club designed an exercise, talk about the rationale that led to the choice of the exercise scenario and parameters. 2 to 5 high-resolution images include captions that explains what is happening in the photos, the names and call signs of any hams pictured, and the name and call sign, if applicable, of the person who took each photo. Send the manuscript and photos to QST at ARRL.org by May 1st, 2025.
A $10,000 grant to the University of Scranton from the Frankfurt Radio Club in Pennsylvania will support the development of a contest dashboard that will leverage the popularity of amateur radio operator contests to benefit science, technology, students, and ham radio science citizen investigation, or ham SCI, community members. John Ross, KD8IDJ, has all the details.
Through the grant, a team of university students, faculty, and FRC members, along with HamSci community members, will collaborate to develop a real-time contesting DX dashboard for the HamSci Personal Space Weather Station, known as PSWS. The PSWS is a modular ground-based system that measures space weather impacts on the Earth's ionosphere. The grant will fund University of Scranton student researcher Owen Zittel, KD3ALD of Shephard Township in Pennsylvania, a first-year computer engineering major, for the summer and fall 2025 semesters to help develop the contest dashboard, and it is expected to be concluded in the spring semester of 2026. University of Scranton physics professor Nathaniel Frizzell, W2NAF, said that through the project, he hopes the university's W3USR amateur radio club members, present and future, will become active radio contesters. We are already ahead of schedule for this project, said Dr. Frizzell. This past weekend, we hosted students from W3USR and the Frankfurt Radio Club to take part in a little contesting. We made over 400 QSOs worth over 250,000 contest points. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Ray Scahola, K9RS, past president of the Frankfurt Radio Club, said that the amateur radio contesters are some of the most enthusiastic subset of ham radio operators, and participants scan the range of ages from teenagers to well over 90.
The Young Ladies Radio League, or YLRL, has announced its Memorial Scholarship Program for 2025. Here with all the details on these scholarships is John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this special report.
The scholarship program is aimed at female amateur radio operators studying radio, communications, electronics, or amateur radio-related arts and sciences. There are 3 Memorial Scholarship Award categories: the Ethel Smith K4LMB Memorial Scholarship, that's $2,500, the Mary Lou Brown NM7N Memorial Scholarship, $2,500, and the Martha Marty Wessel K0EPE Memorial Scholarship, $1,500. YLRL is committed to investing in women in amateur radio, and we believe that every act of volunteerism through amateur radio, even a small one, helps turn the world into a better place, said Vicki Zumwalt, N6KLS, president of YLRL. We hope that our scholarships will not only encourage students to learn more about science, technology, and engineering, but also inspire them to take pride in being an amateur radio operator and to encourage others to do so as well. The YLRL believes that education in the fields of radio, communications, electronics, and amateur radio-related arts and sciences will play an important role in shaping the world's future. Through these memorial scholarships, YLRL hopes to encourage female students to learn more about amateur radio. To qualify, students must be female, have an amateur radio license, and meet the requirements listed on the YLRL website, and apply using the online application. Applications, by the way, are due April 30th, 2025, and winners will be announced in July 2025. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The Young Ladies Radio League is an international nonprofit organization of female amateur radio enthusiasts. It was founded in 1939 and is the longest-running young ladies club in the world.
Election results have been finalized in the ARRL Iowa section. Barry Bulow, W0IY, received 283 votes, defeating incumbent Lelia Garner, WA0UIG, who received 146 votes. Bulow of Cedar Point will assume section manager duties on April 1st. Bulow is a veteran of the United States Air Force and has worked in aerospace engineering. He served on the ARRL National Convention Committee and is a past chair of the ARRL Midwestern Division Convention. Garner has served as section manager since 2019.
On January 21st, 2025, dozens of stations across Northeast Illinois gathered for a 70-centimeter simplex research event. With all the details on this research event, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ at League Headquarters.
The goal was to encourage simplex use, to expand operator skills, and to allow operators to better understand their station's capability and limitations. The operation involved 2 rounds of transmissions and collectively logged over 400 signal reports received by email and aggregated by their net control station. Operators freed themselves from repeaters and access tones and learned to relay, record RST, readability, signal strength tone, signal reports, and pay attention to their noise floor and antenna configurations. One relay through 4 stations spanned nearly 60 miles, allowing net control W9MSG in Glen Ellen, Illinois, to receive a message from KE9 PBO in Sandwich, Illinois, operating on a handheld with 5 watts of power. After the event, all logs were collected and aggregated, and each station received a report that included details of all signal reports given for their station by all other operators. The report also included maps, statistics, and examples of how to leverage the data to better understand station configuration. This included a subsequent discussion on how to create radio path studies leveraging free online resources. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
This was the second of 2 such events. The first was a 2-meter simplex activity in the same area the prior month with 35 stations across 7 countries. Data from both of these nets is now being aggregated to identify qualitative and quantitative differences between 2 meters and 70 centimeters, as experienced by those operators. All of this will lead to a discussion of the propagation challenges and advantages that each band offers and more opportunities for learning.
Greg Lee, KI6GIG, has shared information about the Grassroots Emergency Communications Operations in Arizona. GECO is a free grassroots community-powered disaster recovery program for amateur radio operators and amateur radio emergency communicators, especially those in marginalized communities without emergency plans. The group's free software offers basic information and encourages local organizers to consider 2 enhancements. 1, adding amateur radio communications, both radio and non-radio methods, and using community-based education to integrate indigenous knowledge and emergency preparedness with STEM, STEAMing classroom lessons. The information is designed to improve local education, enhance relevant and practical knowledge, skills, and experience, and to develop a preparedness mindset and cultivate future generations of emergency service volunteers. For additional information, contact Greg Lee via email at gecoradio@gmail.com.
The YouTube tribute by Nick Zittel2NEB to his friend Gerard Zittel2GVA is a video QSL card of sorts, the final courtesy for a contact that changed his life and brought him into the amateur radio community. Gerard, who was originally licensed in 1992 as PE1ONB, opened the door to ham radio for Nick and became his Elmer and later fellow operator on his Parks on the Air adventures. Gerard, who was an enthusiastic CW operator and a net control operator for the New Zealand net, died of cancer at age 59 in November of 2024. On the 1st of February, a celebration of his life was held in New Zealand. Nick's video, posted on YouTube a day later, is an appreciation on a personal level, a reflection on what friendship can mean, especially in a tight-knit community of radio operators. Nick urges hams to continue being communicators and always say what needs to be said, both on and off the air. Upon viewing the video, amateurs around the world responded, touched by the words and images. One commentator wrote, "When we transmit, we send radio waves out into space that travel on forever. May his voice always be out there and remembered."
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I have an update that may apply to many of you. The WSJT development team is pleased to announce the WSJT-X 2.7.0 general availability release. This is the first GA release since version 2.6.1 2 years ago. Major enhancements include a new companion program called QMAP, a new special operating activities called Q65 Pileup and SuperFox, and a new message system feature designed for sending requests to change to another band or mode. More details can be found in the release notes. Just search on WSJTX homepage to get instructions on downloading and installing the latest and greatest. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll get you fixed up. Here is a Marshall Islands Victor 73WW DXpedition update from Majuro, Republic of the Marshall Islands. The V73 Whiskey DXpedition team is pleased to report progress from our QTH on Majuro Atoll. Our operations on the 160 meter and 80 meter bands are turning to be successful. We've experimented with various receiving antennas to optimize our reception capabilities. The weather has finally been favorable, resulting in reduced QRN. However, the constant wind and waves continue to challenge our antenna setups. To ensure optimal performance, we conduct daily antenna maintenance at low tide, reinforcing masts and securing equipment against the elements. While the DXpedition is focused on radio operations, daily life here includes more than just QSOs. As we are located on our own island, a part of the team recently made another grocery trip to Delap Island. Cooking various meals a day for 6 hungry operators and cleaning are part of our routine, adding an extra layer of challenge to this expedition. We are steadily advancing toward our goal of 60,000 QSOs and are eager to make many more contacts with operators worldwide in the remaining days. In line with this objective, we are excited to announce that RTTY operations will start soon. Please refer to our planned frequencies and modes and our detailed band plan available on our website, which is next-generation-dx.com. Our internet connection has become more stable, allowing us to provide real-time updates. The live log is now accessible on ClubLog. We are committed to transparency and upload QSOs to LOTW at least once daily. If you notice any missing QSOs or discrepancies, please don't hesitate to contact us at the next-generation-dx.com website, though replies might be delayed. We extend our gratitude to the global amateur radio community for your continued support and enthusiasm. Your participation fuels our dedication to this DXpedition, and we look forward to making many more contacts in the days to come. And I found this next item to be great news. The Libya Society, 7 amateurs strong, joins the IARU. The International Amateur Radio Union, Region 1, announced last week that the Libyan Communications Amateur Radio Society of Tripoli, Libya, is now an IARU member. This decision was made unanimously. The Libyan Communications Amateur Society was founded on May 12, 2024, and it has 7 licensed amateurs. So welcome to that group to the IARU Region 1. DK6AS Andreas began his FJ/DK6AS activities earlier this week. He plans to operate in the ARRL International DX Contest and will remain on St. Bartholomew until sometime in early March. Listen for him on CW and FT8. The VK9XU team is currently operating from Christmas Island. Lost bag containing fiber poles during their Thai Airways flight hindered the setup of all antennas. They expect the bag to arrive by Friday. Currently, VK9XU has only 2 antennas available. I have seen these guys spotted, but I haven't heard them yet, and I need this for an all-time new one, so I sure hope they get the bag and conditions improve. The Rebel DX group is now QRV is 5 November 9 Delta Tango Golf on 80, 40, 30, 20, 17, 15, 12, and 10 meters. They report, quote, huge noise problems on 80, 20, 15, and 17 meters. They are operating at 2 frequencies at the same time on 40 through 10 meters. The standard and de-expedition frequencies are being used, so good luck with that group. The 4 Sierra 7 SPG team from Sri Lanka have installed all the antennas. However, half the team has been sick. They are now mostly on FT8. And you can check out that group's website at 4s.dexpeditions.org. John 5Z4J, also known as ZS5J, C91J, and A25J, has recently obtained his 5 X-Ray 1 Juliet license. He will primarily operate from Jinja at the source of the River Nile near Lake Victoria. He is currently residing in Nairobi, Kenya, and uses the call sign 5 Zulu 4 Juliet. John has an office in Uganda and regularly travels by road from Kenya to Uganda, typically staying for 2 to 3 weeks per trip. During these trips, he will use the call sign 5 X-Ray 1 Juliet. QSL should only be sent to LOTW as there are no postal facilities for QSL cards. John is in the process of applying for ARRL LOTW certification. So here's kind of a major announcement. The DX India Foundation is embarking on an epic international de-expedition to VU7 at the end of 2025. Quote, hello fellow hams. We've got some super exciting news to share. The DX India Foundation is embarking on an epic international de-expedition to VU7 at the end of 2025. Our team of seasoned operators will be focusing on the lower bands, 160, 80, and 40. We'll have 5 stations covering all bands from 6 meters to 160, and our goal is to make a whopping 100,000 QSOs during our operation. To ensure we've got the best possible operating conditions, we'll be setting up shop in a beautiful beachside location far from resorts and noise-prone areas. Our team will be cozy in separate tents to minimize noise and distractions. We'll be operating for 10 days with tentative dates planned. Our actual operation schedule will be announced soon. If you're interested in joining us, please get in touch so we can sort out the necessary paperwork. This de-expedition is part of our bigger plan to create a top-notch setup for future expeditions, IOTA activations, and contest stations. We need your help. We're reaching out to all DXers, IOTA chasers, and everyone in the amateur radio community to support this massive project. Your contribution will help us achieve our dream of becoming one of the top 20 most wanted entities on 160, 80, and 40 meters. As a thank you, we'll give you a QSL card with special sponsor logo, a shout out on our website and social media channels, and a comprehensive de-expedition report packed with photos and videos. We believe that this project will be a game changer for DXers worldwide and will help us promote amateur radio in India and Asia. Please support us. Donations to support our de-expedition can be sent via PayPal to Sarath, S-A-R-A-T-H, at ivan.in. Your contribution will help us cover the cost of this massive project. Thanks for considering our request. Let's make this a de-expedition for the books. End quote. If any of the information you need to have repeated, you can always send me an email at thedxmentor@gmail.com. So just today, just before I went to record this, I got a follow-up. Quote, Dear IOTA chasers and DXers around the world, we're super stoked to announce the DX India Foundation is headed back to Anola Island, which is IOTA Asia-169, from May 29th to June 1st, 2025. This time we'll be operating on the call sign of Alpha Uniform 2 Mike. This is a rare opportunity for IOTA enthusiasts around the world to log this highly sought-after entity, currently the most wanted IOTA in India. Our team has worked tirelessly to make this activation happen, and we can't wait to share it with you. And you can check out the website address, which is vu2rs.com/AU2M. We've faced some tough challenges in the past, but we're determined to make this activation a success. We invite you to join us on this adventure, says Sarath. Your support means the world to us, and we're grateful for your help in promoting amateur radio in India and Asia. End quote. Again, you can always send me email requesting more details or information if you need it. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7 threes, and thanks to my ex-wife Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Have you ever come across a solution to a problem that you sort of knew you had, but didn't really appreciate until that moment? I had one of those recently. To set the scene, fair warning, we're not going to solve this today, we're still very much shaving yaks, but there's plenty to take away. So, the scene. I'm hosting my weekly net. It's going well. All the internet links are up and running again thanks to the hard work behind the scenes of several unsung heroes. I can name a few. Bob, Victor Kilo 6, Zulu Golf November, John, Victor Kilo 6, Romeo X-Ray, and Rob, Victor Kilo 6, Lima Delta. But there are plenty of others whom I don't know and who have yet to stick up their hand to say, I was there. Regardless, thank you. Anyway, I'm hosting my weekly net, F-Troop. A curious thing is occurring. 2 of the stations are emitting a tone during their transmission. I'm pretty hot on how things sound, so I ask. We talk about it for a bit when Alan, Victor Kilo 6 X-Ray Lima, comes in and tells us that, according to his spectrum analyzer, it's a 1 kHz tone with harmonics, and it's on all transmissions, just audible on 2. This starts a conversation about spectrum analyzers when Alan mentions that he's using an audio spectrum analyzer, a piece of software running on his computer. The software has a copyright from 1999 and, based on the documentation I saw, has lots of excellent functionality. I might even be able to run it on a Linux machine using Wine, but that's an adventure for another day. Randall, Victor Kilo 6 Whiskey Romeo, points out that I could use the spectrum display on Audacity. This is a much more current piece of software, but it's not intended for real-time use. It's what I use to edit the audio after recording my podcast. Not even sure if the spectrum display can show during recording. I've never tried. In the past, I've used SOX, the Swiss Army knife of sound processing, to create sonograms, but that too isn't real time. Then it hits me. I have a real-time tool. I've been playing with it for weeks. GNU Radio. Surely it has a spectrum display. And indeed it does. Several. So, I already have a tool purpose-built for processing signals that can do all the things I'm looking for and some I've not yet imagined. Before I proceed, I'll remind you that we're in the middle of the Bold Yak project, so named because by the time we're done, there won't be much hair left, if any. In case you're unfamiliar, the Bold Yak project aims to create a modular, bidirectional and distributed signal processing and control system that leverages GNU Radio. So, boldly clicking about, I set on the notion of making a block called Phosphor work. Depending on which description you use, it's an open-source GPU-accelerated FFT and waterfall display tool. What that means is that it uses a graphics processor to do the heavy lifting and has the ability to show signal levels across frequencies and on a waterfall display. Apparently, it's a block for RTSA-like spectrum visualization. I'm fairly sure that doesn't mean Railway Technical Society of Australasia or has any relationship with reverse total shoulder arthroplasty or the Road Transport and Safety Agency of Zambia. I'll admit that I didn't see the GPU part of that description until several days later. Had I seen it at the time, I would likely have carefully backed away and shelved the idea, but that's all water under the bridge. To cut to the chase, I've yet to make this show a single pixel. I smelled trouble for the first time when I discovered a post asking if anyone had gotten this to work on a current release of Debian. I came across a lovely post by what appears to be the author helping some hapless user, and I'll confess that's the camp I'm currently in, to make it work. I have no doubt that I can make it work, but that's going to take some effort. Now, at this point, you might ask me why I wasted your time with this tale of woe. Well, the answer is simple. This is what yak shaving looks like. You solve 1,000 little problems one at a time, and if you manage to keep track of what you're doing and why, you can get stuff done. This applies here, but it also applies in your life, in radio, in antenna building, in making a contact, in participating in a contest, in activating a park. Each activity reveals myriad issues that you'll each need to resolve. The more practice you have at this, the better you'll get. I will point out that for me it's not without stress. When I go through intractable problems, I'm often as grumpy as a bear with a sore tooth, whilst my brain is running like a hamster in a wheel generating kilowatts of power. This, too, shall pass. Oh, because I know it's bothering you, RTSA, Real-Time Spectrum Analyzer. Obvious, right? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6 Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. This week we have a rather interesting trophy competition. It was back on March 10th, 1965, that the first QSO via amateur satellite was made on Oscar 3 between HB9RG and DL6EZA. Marking the 60th anniversary, HB9RG is having a competition to see who can make the furthest QSO using any LEO, MEO, or HEO satellite. GEO satellites are not eligible to be used for this. The goal is to complete DX QSOs. The 10 furthest QSOs you report will be factored into the scoring. The competition runs from March 3rd through March 16th. Get out there and make some contacts. If you are stateside, a good long-distance contact for someone on the East Coast may be a Caribbean island or a country in Central America. Those in the mid-U.S. might try for a contact with Hawaii, Central or South America. And those on the West Coast could try Alaska or Russia. There are a lot of possibilities. Of course, the longest contact will be made when both you and the other station are near their acquisition of signal or loss of signal. For more information, visit amsat-hb.org and scroll down a bit, click on the center of the 3 patches. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's solar weather and propagation report. Solar activity is expected to range from low to moderate levels through March 15th. There is a varying chance for R1 or R2, minor or moderate events, and a slight chance for R3 or greater events. Geomagnetic field activity is likely to reach G1 minor levels on February 28th, March 9th, and March 12th to 14th. Active levels are predicted for March 1st. Quiet and quiet to unsettled conditions are expected to prevail throughout the remainder of the period. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Space Weather Prediction Center reports no space weather storms predicted for the next 24 hours. For the last 24 hours, solar flare activity has been at low levels with only a C-class observed. The largest flare was a C8.1 on February 19th. This flare was accompanied by a Type 2 radio emission and associated CME off the southwest edge of the solar disk. Modeling efforts determined the bulk of the CME to miss ahead of Earth's orbit. However, a weak glancing influence cannot be ruled out late on February 24th. Region AR3996 is the largest and most complex region on the disk but was responsible for only one C-class flare. Flux emergence and an increase in interior spots can be seen in region AR3998, but overall the region has been fairly quiet. Spaceweather.com has an article link from the Advancing Earth and Space Sciences website concerning an extreme compression of Earth's magnetic field that was caused by the May 2024 solar superstorm. The increase in geomagnetic activity following the decrease in solar activity is a simple phenomenon to explain. Systems of magnetic field lines over active regions in the Sun open up and charged particles, both free electrons and the nuclei of hydrogen atoms, or protons themselves, slip through them more easily into space. In Earth's orbit, we see an increase in the solar wind and, consequently, an increase in geomagnetic activity. At the same time, The ionization rate of the ionosphere is increasing, while the shortwave propagation conditions may not only worsen, due to scattering on inhomogeneities, but also improve as the MUF may grows. This was well known, for example, on Saturday, February 15th, on the Europe-North America route. The only geomagnetically quiet days in the first half of the month were February 3rd through the 7th. Then the solar wind, blowing from the long canyon-shaped coronal hole, intensified and geomagnetic activity was elevated for most of the second third of February. A calm trend can be expected on most days of the last third of the month. Although there does not appear to be a significant increase in solar activity, it is sufficiently high. In addition, spring is approaching, which is good news for the state of the ionosphere. The predicted planetary A index is 5 for February 21st through the 26th, and 10 on February 27th. The predicted planetary K index will be 2 on February 22nd through the 26th, and 3 on February 27th. The predicted 10.7 cm solar flux will be 170 for February 22nd and 23rd, 190 on February 24th, 195 on February 25th, 200 on February 26th, and 195 on February 27th. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read what the numbers mean, and check out the propagation page of Karl Luetzelschwab, K9LA, where a propagation bulletin archive is available. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocab online for Ham Radio website.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
In radio sport this week, a lot of great contests. February 21st through the 23rd, it's the CQ 160 meter contest, single sideband phone. February 22nd through the 23rd, the REF contest, single sideband phone. The UBDADX contest, that's CW. February 22nd through the 23rd, the South Carolina QSO Party, CW phone and digital. And on February 22nd through the 23rd as well, the North American QSO Party, RTTY, that is digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on February 22nd, HamCon hosting the ARRL Vermont State Convention, that's in Colchester, Vermont. February 28th through March 1st, Birmingham Fest hosting the ARRL Alabama State Convention in Tressville, Alabama. And on March 7th and 8th, the Greater Houston Ham Fest hosting the ARRL Texas State Convention, that's in Rosenberg, Texas. The North America QSO Party, NAQP RIDI 2025, will be in full operation Saturday, February 22nd, 1800 hours UTC, through Sunday, February 23rd, 0559 UTC. The North American QSO parties are favorites of beginners and seasoned operators alike. The NAQPs are low power only, no amplifiers allowed, which makes for a lot more interesting and breathing room on the bands. Small stations can generate very effective runs in the NAQP contest. Multipliers count once per band, which makes for an exciting format, as multipliers can be moved from band to band. The NAQPs allow stations from all parts of North America to be in the running for the top spots. The 12-hour format allows participants to do some great contesting, yet still have time for other activities during the weekend. Participants may enter in the single-op or multi-op categories, and they also have the opportunity to combine up to 5 separate single-op scores into a team score. For complete rules and login information, visit 2025 North American QSO Party CWSSB RTTY on the Internet.
If you've got your eye on the World Radio Sport Team Championship 2026 in the United Kingdom, you may want to read the competition rules, which have just been published by the Championship Committee. The rules have been adjusted slightly from the previous competition to ensure that this is a fair test of operator skills. Questions may be submitted to the committee via social media, on the World Radio Sport Team Championship Reflector, or at amateur radio conventions.
The doors of the International DX Convention in Visalia, California are opening extra wide at the Visalia Conference Center, where young visitors up to the age of 18 are being given entrance for free. Youngsters will get access at no cost to the convention's forums and programs, as well as the exhibit hall. The 76th annual convention is sponsored by the Northern California DX Club and will be held from April 11th through the 13th. The free registration does not include meals, the bus tour, or any raffle tickets. The deadline for anyone to pre-register online is April 3rd. Paying guests who are planning to attend but do not register in advance can expect a 10% increase in the admission fee. For more details, please go to dxconvention.com.
Amateur radio operators have picked up suspicious late-night radio signals in coded Bengali, Urdu, and Arabic along the Indo-Bangladesh border in South Bengal over the past 2 months, raising concerns about possible extremist activities, officials said. The development comes amidst ongoing unrest in Bangladesh and growing anti-India rhetoric in the neighboring country. Alarmed by these transmissions, the operators involved the Ministry of Communications. The matter was subsequently forwarded to the International Monitoring Station in Calcutta for tracking. Ham radio operators have also been asked to monitor and report if similar signals are detected again. These suspicious radio signals have been picked up between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. The transmissions are in coded Bengali with a Bangladeshi accent, Urdu, and Arabic. Sometimes there are signals in another language that we couldn't identify. Whenever we asked those communicating to identify themselves, they went silent, and Barish Nag Biswas, secretary of the West Bengal Radio Club, said. According to Biswas, the first such signal was detected by a ham radio operator in Sadepur in North 24 Parganas district in mid-December. Initially, we did not attach much importance to it, but then similar signals were detected from Basirhat, Bongaon, and later from South 24 Parganas district. Even during the Gangasanar Mela in mid-January, several ham radio users reported hearing these suspicious signals, he said. Asked why these signals seemed suspicious, Biswas explained that their pattern and language usage were unusual. The global norm among ham radio users is that if a third party enters an ongoing communication, they must identify themselves using a radio identification code or radio call sign. But in these cases, whenever we asked for identification, the signals went silent. The pattern remained the same in all instances, he said. A senior official from a security agency who visited Biswas's place for details declined to comment on the matter. When contacted, a senior BSF official acknowledged the seriousness of the situation, stating that unidentified radio chatter along the border is a matter of concern. If we receive details from ham radio users, we will use our resources to track the source of these transmissions, the BSF official said. He added that it is not uncommon for smugglers and extremist groups to use ham radio frequencies, as this mode of communication is unconventional and harder to track compared to mobile networks or emails, which are more easily monitored. Biswas recalled previous instances where suspicious and unidentified radio transmissions were detected.
In Germany, the National Amateur Radio Society, the DARC, has been keeping a watchful ear on radio interference, tracking the increase in noise generated over the years by residential and commercial electronics. The effort, known as Electrical Noise Area Measurement System, or ENOMS, focuses on frequencies between 66 kHz and 31 MHz, and collects its information from more than 50 monitoring points around the country. Each of the ENOMS units is capable of storing as much as 5 years of collected data on a local disk drive without having the need for an internet connection. One of the senior engineers with ENOMS will be presenting a look at the initiative at the Centenary Technical Symposium of the South African Radio League when it takes place on March 22nd. The League has had an increasing focus on RF pollution. The South Africa Radio League said that the presentation by Andreas Locke, DG8AL, underscores that pollution of the RF spectrum is second only to concerns about climate change.
With Solar Cycle 25 still at peak conditions and several popular contests this time of year, there have been some interesting, if not totally rare, DX opportunities on the HF bands. With more details on this story, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ at League headquarters.
Spots have been flying on DX Club email reflectors this week. VK9XU on Christmas Island, V73WW on Marshall Island, 5N9DTG in Nigeria, KH7AL/KH9 on Wake Island, 7Q2MM on Malawi, and others all have been noted, among many others. The featured expedition timeline on dxworld.net shows a number of interesting opportunities to add to the logbook totals in the next several weeks. A full slate of operators is fanned out around the world for the ARRL International DX Contest. The CW portion was this past weekend, and the phone weekend starts March 1st at 0000 Zulu. Getting on the air and being familiar with current propagation conditions is a great way to prepare for contests, said ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1SFE. Contest activity is on an upward trend with the peaking solar cycle, and Bork hopes that more entrants brings an even higher level of excitement to the contest. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Last year, Baroque noted we saw a record number of logs submitted. I hope even more operators participate this year. You don't have to be a big gun to be a part of it. Everyone is welcome. Hopefully the solar cycle will give even modest stations like mine access to a global playing field.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 27th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, hams, organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our appreciation goes out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for granting us permission to use his website in the production of these segments. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the next chapter of Ham Radio History. Spark to CW. Through the years, starting well before the war, amateurs occasionally had discussed undamped oscillations and how audions could be used to detect them. By summer 1916, a government radio inspector was predicting that in 5 years most amateurs would be using undamped waves. QST noted that with the influx of mature men and a willingness to spend more, around $250 on equipment, it was just a matter of time before a Mr. Undamped Wave would appear and lead the way. A few things, including a world war, would have to happen first to improve wireless technology. Everything seemed to depend on the ability to develop transmitting equipment to produce undamped waves, a difficult task without high-power vacuum tubes. And receiving them was problematic too. Most Sparks receivers were not designed to hear undamped, unmodulated, narrow signals. Transmitters and receivers would both have to change in fundamental ways. Commercial equipment makers began to take interest, seeing a new market opportunity. The new DeForest quarter-kilowatt undamped transmitting set was one way to get going quickly if you could afford it. But even assuming innovation would supply the technology, someone, quite a few someones in fact, would have to adopt it and put signals on the air. The only way to really get going was for a lot of amateurs to switch over together, otherwise there would be no one to talk to. QST suggested that anyone already planning to get on the air with undamped waves should let Herbert, Matthews, or the Seafrieds know about it so that everyone could begin to get coordinated, which would help the relay work a great deal. One correspondent suggested that the League should consider establishing a special appointment for stations with the capability. Work on using undamped waves for amateur radio began in earnest only after vacuum tubes were improved and made cheaper. These advancements, which finally made it practical and affordable for hams to use vacuum tubes to build oscillators for transmitting, were brought about by the demands of military use during the war. Just as QST was coming back after the shutdown, incoming editor and ARRL secretary Kenneth B. Warner wrote about what was the new wave literally and figuratively. This was the first time the mode was referred to in the magazine as continuous wave transmission, or CW. The vacuum tube was the only device capable of producing CW signals at low power levels and zero decrement. To put this in the simplest possible language, with vacuum tube transmission, all our energy is concentrated on as near one wavelength as is possible by any known method, noted Warner. The greater efficiency promised to allow distant communication with much lower power than Spark and much less QRM. But this radio utopia would not be possible until everyone was on CW. Should a Spark station come on, it would likely overwhelm the receiver and drown out a nearby CW signal. Although vacuum tubes made generating CW easier and were more reliable and more uniform in behavior than before the war, they had not yet been perfected. Oscillators were still unstable, difficult to adjust, and keying one on and off for telegraphy would make its frequency fluctuate wildly. One method used to avoid this was to run the oscillator continuously and shift the wavelength with the key, something we'd call frequency shift keying, FSK, today. Of course, this meant that a signal was always being transmitted even when not being keyed. Somewhere else on some other wavelength, a reverse code would be heard, doing nothing useful and causing QRM. The old man got into the discussion too, writing about rotten undamped, relating his first attempt to receive CW. At first he was confused, mistakenly trying to copy the so-called backlash, the signal emitted when the key was up, inverse Morse, instead of the primary signal. Then he dealt with skittish receiver tuning when his every hand and body position affected it. Another annoyance was that with undamped waves, which he sometimes referred to as unmoistened, all signals sounded the same. They had no personality like signals from Spark transmitters, each of which had its own special sound. You could change the tone of an undamped signal at will by just tuning the receiver. It had no inherent sound of its own. In the fall of 1919, an anonymous author, probably Cruz, as technical editor, speculated about using a single circuit for both transmitting and receiving. It was the first reference to the possibility of transceiving. A transmitting circuit would work quite well as a receiving circuit by replacing the high-voltage supply with a battery at normal, i.e. lower voltages. It would provide inconceivable gain in operating ease, since the transmitter would be, by definition, tuned to the same wavelength as the receiver. And a Navy correspondent who wrote about his experience building a regenerative receiving circuit for both CW and Spark using a British Audion, noted offhandedly that by inserting a key in the B+ line, it could also send CW for 2 miles, another transceiver. The following spring, QST declared, "Amateur continuous wave telegraphy for relay work has at length arrived. Not that it is by any means perfected in its details, but it is working, and the benefits we expected are being experienced, as well as the troubles we expected." Gradually, stations began to appear on the air using undamped waves, either pure CW or modulated in some manner. 2 commercial stations called Air Service, with call signs UM and GMC, belonging to the Glenn L. Martin Company, now Lockheed Martin, were using both CW telegraphy and phone on 180 and 370 meters. Several prominent amateur stations appeared too, including 2XX in Ossining, New York, using both voice-modulated and straight undamped, and had been routinely heard in Little Rock, Arkansas. NSF, the Navy Lab station at the Washington, D.C. Navy Yard, was using both straight and chopped CW. But the station presented as the most interesting was that of J.O. Smith, the ARRL traffic manager, 2ZL. Smith was junking his Spark set as outgrown, having experienced CW's superiority over Spark in getting through in the presence of QRM and QRN. 1AW also compared modulated CW from 8XK in Pittsburgh to Spark and found that 2.5 amps of modulated CW, MCW, was received at approximately the same strength as 8.5 amps of sharply tuned Spark, since, for the CW signal, all of the energy was concentrated on one frequency. CW also sounded quite different from Spark because of the totally differing characteristics, too. CW can often be read through an inferno of Spark QRM, remarked Smith. And it was difficult to tune in. The very sharpness is a handicap in these early days, for one must be right on the tune to hear it, he added. Oh, what a world that speaks for the QRM minimizing possibilities of CW. This was more of a problem than a benefit at this point because of the instability of oscillators in both transmitters and receivers. To make contacts, amateurs were either prearranging specific times and wavelengths or starting out on Spark and then moving to CW using exactly the same wave so that two stations could more easily find each other. Modulating CW with a buzzer or a tone could make it audible on a non-oscillating set and also made it easier to tune in. The Coltbits oscillator and a simple transmitter based upon it were introduced in May 1920 and took amateurs one step further towards stable frequency control. By July, QST was reporting a gradual but sure trend from Spark to undamped, and that we are on the eve of a great transition in amateur methods. Even the old man, 1 year after complaining about rotten undamped, had changed his mind about this CW stuff and wrote that he was swearing off Spark, anticipating an end to QRM. I've been fixing for this shift for some time, he claimed.
A quick break for identification purposes. You're listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
QRM has got so fierce that most of the time it is impossible to work any distance at all. With rotary gaps belching forth 5 amperes on any old tune, as at 200, and the unlicensed moonshine spark coil stuff from the whatnots going every night, doing any relay work is like listening to a whispered life story in a nightlife restaurant with the jazz band gone amok close up to your starboard quarter. By fall, there was a marked increase in the number of CW stations, despite the unavailability of vacuum tubes, or at least ones capable of appreciable power at reasonable cost, the only remaining impediment to even more widespread use. QST assured readers that an ample supply was on its way, and meanwhile amateurs could always buy them from England, where there seemed to be a plentiful supply of various kinds and capabilities. 2XJ and KQO SS Ontario reported using what they called a break-in system for CW. The transmitter output fed a split inductor in which one end went to the antenna and the other to ground, each through its own tuned circuit. When balanced, the two currents flowed in opposite directions and did not induce any signal in a set of secondary windings which were connected to the receiver. However, signals coming in via the antenna at one end of the inductor pair would flow through the inductors in series and still produce a signal in the receiver. It was an ingenious way to avoid switching, but at the cost of wasting half of the transmitter power, which went directly to ground. As fall arrived, 1920 began the first year in which traffic handling had continued uninterrupted through the noisy summer. The word season in connection with amateur radio was now only of historic value. It is a term once used in an age that is gone for good, wrote traffic manager Smith. He attributed most of this success to more stations using CW. It would seem that the entire male population of the continent of North America, also a few, even of the superior sex, are going to install CW sets very soon. Although the state-of-the-art did not yet make good CW easy to produce, its popularity continued to grow rapidly, Warner noted. In the vernacular of the day, straight CW is the berries. A separate, parallel world inhabited by low-power CW stations was now on the air every night underneath and oblivious to the spark chatter. In August, the U.S. Shipping Board announced an offer to sell 4 complete Spark transmitters at less than 10% of their cost price. Spark was clearly on its way out. Besides the difficulties caused by the lack of vacuum tubes, tuners designed for Spark were too unstable and imprecise for CW. Finding a desired wavelength and staying there was not simple. A few new techniques made a big difference. In June, John L. Reinhardt's 1QP, also nicknamed 1QP, of South Manchester, Connecticut, presented his new tuner designed specifically for CW. It offered a way to tune CW more easily than Spark, something quite surprising considering the usual problem with CW being so sharp to tune compared with Spark. Furthermore, Reinhardt's new tuner reduced the number of adjustments necessary to tune in a CW signal, achieving what is taken for granted today, a single adjustment that lets you tune across CW stations, stop at any selected one, then continue tuning past it, but still be able to return to the previous wavelength by resetting the tuning dial. In Reinhardt's new design, a single inductor with multiple taps was used to tune the receiver. Two additional movable inductors at either side of the main one were used to improve feedback on short wavelengths and allow the detector to oscillate. Once an operator set up this coupling using a particular ARRL, the inductors could be left alone and the circuit could be tuned with a variable capacitor. The two key innovations in the Reinhardt's design were to separate the tuning of the antenna circuit from that of the oscillation wavelength, and to provide regeneration feedback that did not need readjustment after changing wavelength. These two adjustments could be set up first around a given wavelength range and then alone. Then a single variable capacitor could be used to tune around within its range of adjustment. A second variable capacitor provided additional finer tuning of the beat note once a signal was selected. This design also greatly reduced or eliminated the capacitance effects of the operator's hand near the equipment, the old man's complaint. And the tuner could even then be used to transmit for local, meaning low power use, by putting the detector into oscillation and keying the ground lead or by inserting a microphone there. Whether local or not, however, a receiver that transmitted to would increasingly become a problem rather than a useful feature. As the next summer season arrived with its severe noise conditions, another instance of an on-air contest was planned, this time between Spark and CW. From 16 through 19 July at times and wavelengths to be announced, pairs of stations in each division would transmit a message for general reception by everyone else. To enter, you would copy messages from as many stations as possible with a witness present, which could be any of mother, father, sister, brother, uncle, aunt, grandmother, grandfather, a blacksmith, clergyman, policeman, doctor, or lawyer. Your score would be calculated as the total miles, line of sight distance, of all receptions, both Spark and CW together. The operator with the highest score would win, with other high scores getting honorable mention in QST. This is not quite the equivalent of a modern contest, since stations were either transmitting or receiving, but not both. In that respect, it more resembled the transatlantic tests, which would come later. The published schedule of transmitting stations revealed that most were planning to operate well above 200 meters, apparently still uncertain about the usefulness of the region below. But the test turned out to be mostly a bust, since it happened to take place on one of the stormiest nights across the country. The organizers had wanted to test CW's effectiveness under noisy conditions, but these were a bit too much. Only 14 reports were received. Although this was a very small sample, they did seem to be slightly longer distance heard with CW than with Spark, adding them together per the rules. As the summer of 1921 drew to a close, it was becoming clear to many that CW would replace Spark, though few anticipated how swiftly it would happen. Included in this material are quotes from the following: C.D. Curtis and W.O. Horner, The Audion as a Detector of Undamped Waves, QST, May 1916, page 92. Undamped Waves, editorial, QST, July 1916, page 173. Undamped Wave Transmitters, editorial, QST, October 1916, page 301. K.B. Warner, The Essentials of VT Transmitters, QST, July 1919, page 3. The Old Man, Rotten Undamped, QST, July 1919, page 7. More about VT transmitters, QST September 1919, page 22. About the British Ultraudion, radio communications by the amateurs, QST October 1919, page 27. The Advent of Amateur CW, QST April 1920, page 13. Anonymous, an experimental CW transmitter, QST May 1920, page 5. CW Editorial, QST, July 1920, page 24. The Old Man, Rotten Damped Spark Stuff, QST, July 1920, page 9. A Few Ideas for Amateur CW, QST, September 1920, page 5. The Operating Department, QST, September 1920, page 26. The Berries Editorial, QST, March 1921, page 29. Spark Sets for Sale, Radio Communication by the Amateurs, QST, 1921, page 59. Amateur Radio Stations, QST, June 1921, page 42. A Receiving Tuner for CW, QST, June 1921, page 5. All Set to Perforate the QRN, QST, July 1921, page 31. The Static Puncturing Contest, QST, September 1921, page 13. With a tip of the TWIR cap to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website materials. Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio. Ham's organizations, events, and inventions. In the preparation of this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
World Amateur Radio Day is April 18th every year, and in 2025, World Amateur Radio Day is extra special. ARRL invites radio clubs and schools to organize a ham radio open house in April to highlight the amateur radio service for its development and practice of the latest radio communications and technology, and as a hands-on pathway into STEM fields for the next generation. ARRL Public Relations and Outreach Manager Sierra Harrop, W5DX, an associate professor of physics and engineering at the University of Scranton, Nathaniel Frizzell, W2NAF, will join in an upcoming podcast to talk about what a ham radio open house might include and how your club or group can start organizing one.
Some sad news to report this week as Robert Buss, W2OD, passed away on February 18, 2025. He has served as the ARRL Northern New Jersey Section Manager since 2020. Buss served as an Assistant Section Manager, Emergency Coordinator, and Net Manager prior to his appointment. Buss was born in Minnesota and was first licensed in 1950. He graduated from the University of North Dakota with a degree in electrical engineering. He worked for Bell Laboratories and completed a master's from New York University, according to his obituary. Buss was a volunteer examiner and an ARRL Life member. He was 87 years old.
AMSAT's golf project is targeting a launch first quarter of 2026 called Golf T, a 3U CubeSat carrying a VU linear transponder, an X-band SDR-based downlink, and an active attitude determination and control system. The follow-on, Golf 1, is currently targeted for a launch the first quarter of 2027. AMSAT's Fox Plus project also proceeding towards being ready for a launch of a 1U CubeSat called Fox Plus A with a VU linear transponder. AMSAT's Fox Plus B is also proceeding with an AMSAT XBT as the core transponder technology. AMSAT's XBT is intended to break down the barrier between linear and FM transponders using modern signal processing and SDR. It will be capable of providing simultaneous multiple-channel operation using multiple modes. All modes will be simultaneously supported from CW through sideband, through narrowband FM, through PSK31, BPSK, QPSK, and such, and even slow scan TV. The signal processing portion of the transponder will be reconfigurable in orbit and initial design as traditional UV non-inverting and configuration. AMSAT's Fox Plus B satellite is also expected to fly AMSAT's PACSAT payload. Volunteers are always needed to help bring AMSAT's engineering projects to fruition. For more information on how to volunteer, visit amsat.org.
Interloon, a Seattle-based startup founded by former Blue Origin technologists, is aiming to harvest helium-3 from the moon to support quantum computing applications here on Earth. Helium-3, a rare isotope deposited into the lunar regolith by solar wind, was first identified in samples brought back by NASA's Apollo missions. While the potential applications of helium-3 have intrigued scientists for years, recent archaeological research highlights significant challenges in extracting the isotope. The U.S. Geological Survey suggests that obtaining commercially viable amounts would require processing millions of tons of lunar regolith, a task comparable to large-scale mining operations here on Earth. Despite these hurdles, Interloon CEO Rob Meyerson remains optimistic. The company envisions an extraction system operating much like an agricultural setup, with 5 harvesters, each the size of a large SUV. Meyerson acknowledges that it'll take years before the company sees a financial return, but he emphasizes the growing demand for helium-3 in quantum computing. The isotope plays a critical role in cooling superconducting quantum computers to temperatures close to absolute zero. With quantum computing companies recognizing the need for a stable helium-3 supply, Interloon believes now is the time to act. Interloon is not the first to consider the commercial potential of lunar helium-3. Apollo 17 astronaut and Interloon's executive chairman, Jack Schmidt, long has advocated its use in nuclear fission reactors. However, investment interest has shifted towards quantum computing applications, which promise quicker returns. And beyond that, helium-3 has other potential uses, including medical imaging and radiation detection. Interloon hopes to eventually supply tens of kilograms per year, a goal that Meyerson believes is both realistic and financially sustainable, given current market prices up around $20 million per kilogram. However, some experts remain skeptical about the feasibility of large-scale helium-3 extraction from the moon. Laszlo Cathili, a research geologist at the USGS Astrogeology Science Center, notes lunar helium-3 concentrations range from just 2.4 to 26 parts per billion in Apollo samples. Now, given these figures, obtaining a single kilogram would require processing between 100,000 and 1 million tons of lunar soil. Cathili stopped short of dismissing the endeavor outright, saying, "The moon does contain resources. It's merely a question of how they can be effectively utilized." To address these concerns, Interloon is planning a research development mission in 2027 to analyze helium-3 concentrations at a potential mining site. The mission will be followed by a pilot plant in 2029 to demonstrate extraction and processing on the lunar surface. The company's initial lunar mission will launch through NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Systems Initiative. Interloon is actively securing funding, having already raised $18 million with plans for another round of fundraising coming in the near future. While profitability remains uncertain, experts acknowledge that Interloon's success will depend on the efficiency of its extraction methods. Chris Dreyer from the Colorado School of Mines notes that certain minerals trap more helium-3 than others, potentially increasing yield in select locations. However, large-scale excavation will be necessary, posing technical challenges, particularly with lunar dust. And despite these obstacles, Dreyer believes iterative development, designing, testing, and improving equipment could make Interloon's ambitions feasible. As advances in space exploration continue, the prospect of mining helium-3 on the moon is becoming an increasingly tangible reality.
On Saturday, March 29th, the RSGB National Radio Center coordinator, Martin Baker, G0GMB, together with Andy Webster, G7UHN, from the Radio Communications Foundation, will be delivering a talk in the Fellowship Auditorium at the Bletchley Park Museum. The presentation will introduce people to the radio spectrum and how to get to grips with the fundamentals of radio transmission. The session is being delivered as part of the RSGB's ongoing strategy to promote amateur radio to wider audiences. The Society is pleased to announce that RSGB members who would like to attend the talk are able to benefit from a 10% discount, reducing the price to £14.40. To find out more about this talk, go to the What's On section on the Bletchley Park website. If you'd like to visit the Bletchley Park Museum after the talk, don't forget that RSGB members can gain free entry by downloading a voucher from the RSGB website.
The Argentine Radio Club is hosting its first international gathering of female radio amateurs and has extended the registration deadline until the 25th of February. The meeting is taking place from March 6th through the 8th at the Scout Camp at Mar del Plata, and is being held in recognition of International Women's Day on Saturday, March the 8th. Marina LU1VYL, who is on the National Society's Board of Directors, told that the talks and workshops will cover a variety of topics, including a discussion of why national radio societies play such a vital role in defending amateurs' use of the spectrum in each country. Radio Club YL Chile, CE4YLC, will share the story of how their club evolved and grew. A number of DXpeditioners have presentations planned so they can share their adventures. Workshops will include an introduction to DX, practical ways to study CW, and construction of a double bazooka dipole and CW oscillators. There's good news for those who want to get on the air. Marina said there will be a station at the campsite. Spots are limited, and Marina said that after the closing date, no more participants can be accommodated.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
The Argentine Radio Club is hosting its first international gathering of female radio amateurs and has extended the registration deadline until the 25th of February. The meeting is taking place from March 6th through the 8th at the Scout Camp at Mar del Plata, and is being held in recognition of International Women's Day on Saturday, March the 8th. Marina LU1VYL, who is on the National Society's Board of Directors, told that the talks and workshops will cover a variety of topics, including a discussion of why national radio societies play such a vital role in defending amateurs' use of the spectrum in each country. Radio Club YL Chile, CE4YLC, will share the story of how their club evolved and grew. A number of DXpeditioners have presentations planned so they can share their adventures. Workshops will include an introduction to DX, practical ways to study CW, and construction of a double bazooka dipole and CW oscillators. There's good news for those who want to get on the air. Marina said there will be a station at the campsite. Spots are limited, and Marina said that after the closing date, no more participants can be accommodated.
Ian Kuhn, KI9W, lived and thrived in the world of sound, the sound of amateur radio, which filled his life with friends and outdoor adventures and the musical sounds of American rock. Ian was an integral part of the Dave Matthews Band, the musicians who relied on his talents as sound engineer and stage manager to bring polish to their performances, and they made him part of their family. Ian, who had pancreatic cancer, died on February 10th at his home in Illinois. His death was announced by the band on its website and by his amateur radio friends on Facebook. Though Ian found joy in using his professional talents to give the Dave Matthews Band and other music groups their concert-ready sound, he was just as immersed in amateur radio and the people he met on and off the air. Ian was an active member and supporter of the 100 Watts in a Wire community that grew out of a podcast begun in 2015 by Christian Kudnick, K-O-S-T-H. Christian said that the two became very close friends. Christian recalled when he and Ian called CQ from the famous Arch in Christian's home city of St. Louis, Missouri, twice. Ian would often remark how lucky he was that he could tour with the band and find a way to operate portable from POTA parks near many of the concert's venues. Christian went on to say, "He was a dear friend, and I'll always miss him." We thank the Dave Matthews Band for this story.
And finally this week, we have for you a terrific story about how high school and a science fiction movie sparked interest in amateur radio. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here with the story.
Steve Schnickel was a young high school student in the late 80s and was introduced to amateur radio through his electronics classes. He also spent time working at a local Radio Shack and watching science fiction movies at a nearby theater in his hometown of Pensacola, Florida. Amateur radio's next biggest influence on Steve came in 1997 on opening night of the movie Contact, about a scientist who finds evidence of extraterrestrial life and is chosen to make first contact. I remember the entire theater erupted when, in the opening scene, amateur radio operator K4WLD responded to a call from W9GFO and stated his location was Pensacola, said Schnickel. It sounded like the home team had scored in overtime to win the game. It was very loud. Fast forward to November 24th, 2024. Schnickel passed the exam for his technician license, as was assigned KQ4YXP on November 11th. Then he passed his general license and on November 29th changed his call sign to KQ4ZDR and then again to KZ4OW. After a month of study, he passed his extra class license exam, but there was still something missing from his newfound amateur radio hobby. To celebrate, I started researching vanity call signs in order to try and reward myself with a 1x2 call sign. I researched everything that had become available, and just as I was about to file the application with the FCC with a list of about a dozen 1x2 calls, I then paused and wondered if anybody actually had the call sign WK4WLD from the movie. It turned out K4WLD had just fallen out of a 2-year grace period hold a couple of weeks prior and was now available. Schnickel submitted his vanity application and on January 11th, 2025, was assigned the new call sign K4WLD. I can proudly say the K4WLD was awarded to me in January of 2025, and I still live in Pensacola, Florida. Now that is life imitating art, Schnickel concluded. And K4WLD has come home to Pensacola in real life, just like in the movie. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
All well and good except for one small detail. Most of his equipment has been on back order for several months. He is also a proud new ARRL member.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is streamed on the internet, broadcast on low-power FM, and heard on nets and repeaters all around the world, like the K2IWR repeater operated by the Skyline Amateur Radio Club on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, where This Week in Amateur Radio is heard each Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to have your club's repeater announced on This Week in Amateur Radio, send us an email with all the pertinent information to w2xbs77@gmail.com. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.